You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're excited to welcome Dr. Bethany Raiff, a leader in combining technology with behavioral interventions to promote healthy behaviors. Dr. Raiff will share her insights on using innovative tools to support families, raising children, including video game-based learning and mobile interventions for encouraging positive habits. Whether you're a parent, a therapist, an individual looking for support, or passionate about behavioral interventions, this episode will offer new understanding and opportunities. This is a good way for us to look at the broad nature of behavioral interventions and that it applies to every individual, and that's where the inclusivity really occurs. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Bethany Raiff.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I love the fact that we're taking a little detour and not focusing solely on autism today, and instead are really looking at the broad picture of how behavioral interventions affect all of our lives. And I'd love to give you the opportunity to be able to educate our audience on where your interest in behavioral health in the field of technology really spurred.
Yeah, so I think, when it comes to health in general, I actually, as a teenager, I worked at Planned Parenthood. So that's kind of where my interest in public health originally came from. And I thought I was going to go the public health route until I was an undergraduate. And I took a class with Greg Madden at University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And he was a new faculty member. For those who don't know who he is, he's done a lot of work in behavioral economics. He studied, so he's a big behavior analyst, and I got really lucky to work with him when he was sort of just getting started in his career, and got started with research, doing behavioral, sort of basic research, really. Actually, I was doing research with pigeons and rats, and even people, but people in really controlled settings in the lab, and looking at decision making. So decision making, I mean, really, health behavior comes down to decision making. That's really what it's all about. You can either watch a show or get on the bike. You can either, eat a salad or eat fried chicken. You have choices always. And so I got really interested in decision making, and in particular how that applied to health behavior. And when I was in a class with him, I think he started telling me about this intervention called contingency management. And I'm not sure how familiar your audience would be with that, but it's basically just a word for positive reinforcement. But it was really specifically being applied in the area of substance use disorders, and a lot of the work was being done at Hopkins. And so that was like, that's what I want to do. I just knew right away when I heard about it, this is what I had to do. So, yeah.
And I love that path. And to be honest, that's kind of where my interest initially started as well, was in kind of habit control, learning theory, understanding how these choices are made and what are the contingencies, what in the environment is leading me to make these choices. And maybe that's something that you can give us a little bit better understanding of is, what is behavioral economics? What is the concept behind that? Because that seems to guide so much of how we are living our lives.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so behavioral economics is really the science of choice, I think, is like a really general way to explain it. Just how do we allocate our behavior? How do we decide what to do when we're presented? And basically in the field of behavioral economics, which is really kind of like a subfield within behavior analysis in a way. It's kind of a focused area in behavior analysis, but it's really just like, conceptualizing all behavior as choice. You always could be doing something other than what it is you're doing at any given time. And so behavioral economics gets a little more quantitative with it. There's all these quantitative models, and there are a couple of like really specific theories about how people allocate their behavior and why you pick this over that. And there's lots of, I don't know how in depth you want me to get with that, but I could talk about at least a few that I've worked on a little bit more.
I think knowing some of the ways that the behavioral economics has been researched, has been applied to everyday life, and how it shaped some of the science of decision making, some of the science of the daily living that have occurred because of the work that's being done.
Yeah, so probably one of the most robust findings in behavioral economics is this idea of delayed discounting. Sometimes it's referred to as impulsive choice or impulsivity. That may be an easier way for people to understand it, but because everybody's heard that term or that phrase before. But it's the idea that we have a choice between something that's small and immediate and something that's more delayed but maybe larger, like a bigger, better outcome. And so if you take, for example, this is the example I use in class when I talk about this is, you know, I talk to college students about it. So this may make sense to college students. But you know, you could go out and have maybe an application to not college age. It'd be like going out to get your coffee every day, like your daily coffee. About $5. You're spending your $5 on your daily coffee every day, or you know, 5 to 7. It's getting inflation, right? But you also really want to go on this trip to Paris. Or you need a new car or whatever the big ticket item is that you're wanting. And, you know, you have this choice. I could go get my coffee today for $5 and spend this $5, or I could save. It's going to take a while. It's going to be delayed. It's not going to be immediate, but it's so much bigger, right? It's this like very big delayed reward versus this very small immediate reward. And that's kind of the idea of delayed discounting is that some people are really good at waiting for that very large delayed reward and tucking that money away and, you know, making their coffee at home and all of those things and saving those few bucks enough to tuck it away and get that big reward at the end. And then other people just have a really hard time with that. And they just, you know, there's a preference for that more immediate reward. And actually our preferences change over time. Like if both things are delayed, it's really easy to say, well, obviously I'm going for Paris, you know, I'm not going to get the coffee every day. But as you get closer to being, you know, sleep deprived and needing that cup of coffee in the morning, it starts looking more attractive and you start thinking, oh, I'll just do it this one time. It's not going to impact too much, you know, my trip to Paris. So you know, I'll just get this one coffee now. So as things get closer, it becomes more tempting to take that smaller sooner because the larger later reward is still delayed, but that coffee is now available right now. So yeah.
That's such a good example. As I actually had that same conversation with my daughter the other day. We were looking at her bank account and looking at her budget, and we were just kind of going through it and be like, well, when I'm looking at this, is that you're making a lot of these very small purchases that are adding up, and you're making them for specific reasons. And those reasons are always at the moment I'm making that choice. And it is that impulsivity. And that decision-making process is so important. When I think about applied behavior analysis, and I think about just even behavioral economics, oftentimes is that the field of ABA has been tailoring this to autistics and to a therapy model where I think that there's so much more broader usage as we start to look at our own lives and look at just how everyone benefits from being able to recognize behavioral impact on decision making. What are some of the other ways that if you were to say, you know, we need to broaden the field, we need to start thinking outside of the box of a singular population, that behavioral economics really helps and ABA works? I mean, you mentioned potentially drug cessation or something to that extent, but what are some of the ways that you're looking at this field?
Yeah, I mean, if there's behavior, then these basic principles apply to it. That's as simple as it is. It's, you know, we all are bound to these basic principles. So I think one thing that's important is really getting and understanding and making sure people are taught the very basic core principles of behavior, because they apply to all of us all the time under all, you know, all the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you know, it can apply to anything you want. Things that I'm applying it to are things like substance use treatment. I do a lot with smoking cessation, helping people quit. But I also do work in the health field more broadly, like medication management or medication adherence, and physical activity adherence, all these things that it's all behavior. It's all behavior. So, I think that there's this stat that when it comes to like preventable death, premature death, 80 or not 80%, but it's something like 40% of the causes of premature death are behavioral patterns, are things that we're doing that we could change what we're doing and do them differently. So whether that be substance use, alcohol, cigarette smoking is like the number one still preventable cause of death and disease in the United States. Obviously, the opioid crisis is happening now. Almost everybody's been impacted by it in some way, whether directly or indirectly. And then just when it comes to like stress management or adherence with any kind of medical regimen, everybody has to take antibiotics or has to take some kind of medical, you're treated with something at some point, and that comes down to behavior. So although there's genetic contributions to health and all these other things, ultimately the things we can change are behavior, and so there's any of these basic principles: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, any of those things can be applied to health behavior.
Yeah, and whether you're talking about smoking or drinking or even overeating or avoiding exercise, it feels to me like there's patterns that might exist in one's daily life that are going to contribute to making that immediate decision as well. As that if I should be exercising and then all of a sudden I think, well, maybe I'll have a snack beforehand and decide to eat the wrong food or kind of overindulge in something, the likelihood of me exercising probably drops extremely low, is that I'm not going to go do that right afterwards because my body's just not ready for it. What are some of the core principles that you're looking at with some of the behavior change strategies that exist across all of these categories that you've been looking at? Whether it's delaying the impulse control or something to that effect.
No, that's a good question. So most of my research does focus on, or the work that I do focuses on, like, how can we make these things that kind of are not unpleasant and don't have any immediate reward more immediately rewarding? Because usually when you're engaging in exercise, right, it doesn't feel good. It actually is often unpleasant until you get to a certain point where it is reinforcing, at least initially for people who are starting out and just going with physical activity. It's not usually a pleasant experience. So there's some immediate punishers that we're trying to compete with. And so contingency management is really adding some kind of immediate positive reinforcer onto that behavior, because the delayed positive reinforcer, the naturally occurring positive reinforcers are delayed. And so we've got this whole delayed discounting issue that I talked about before. That might be improved health or weight loss, if that's something you're aiming for. It could be lowering your cholesterol or your blood pressure. Those things don't happen right away. They take time. And so the reality is it just doesn't feel good. And that's true for substance use too. So, if I quit smoking, I'm going to have withdrawal symptoms, and that's unpleasant. And the reason people go back to relapse, is because it takes away those bad feelings. It's a negative reinforcer. It's an immediate negative reinforcer. But if I can add something right now in the moment to keep you here, with that behavior, then eventually, you'll get to that naturally occurring reinforcer, hopefully. And it can take a while. We don't know how long for some behaviors, how long we need to do this. Some things might be very short-lived, like antibiotics. You need to take that for 10 days. So, arrange some immediate reinforcer for you every time you take your medication, as it's prescribed. And it can be a short-term thing. But some things are like, chronic behavior, things that they're lifestyle changes. These are things that you need to do for the rest of your life. Physical activity is one of those, eating your choices for food is another one, if you have a chronic illness, taking your medications is another one. So, yeah.
And the discussion of this it's so important right now, because when I'm looking at just the behavioral change and how that's being viewed as a society, is that it's all focused on, some of the negatives that occur or some of the way that it's been misapplied. But the way that you're describing it is we all benefit from being aware and being able to plan around a lot of these. events during the day or decisions that we're making, or even just planning in general, and understanding that I have this particular pattern and I'd like to make the change. How do I do it? And creating that system. Is there a lot of, I guess, value matching? It doesn't feel like the same reinforcers obviously are going to be used when you're changing behaviors over time, as that initially I might need to give myself a lot of enticement to get on the treadmill or to even go 5 minutes on a treadmill. Whereas as time goes on, I would imagine is that you're doing some reduction of the value of the reinforcer because it becomes intrinsic.
Yeah, you make a really good point. This whole extrinsic intrinsic thing. A lot of behavior that we want, that we should be doing, is not intrinsically reinforcing, or however we want to talk about it. And how does something become intrinsically reinforcing? I don't know that we know a lot about that, like how it, other than maybe it being associated with other things. So I'll just use an example of how I got started with physical activity, because I was not physically active until I was really in graduate school, almost at the end of graduate school. And that was, I don't know how familiar you are with like the pre-med principle, but it's basically this idea where I got on this, I had this glider that somebody gave me. It's sort of like a ski type thing, kind of like a Nordic track used to be. And I just would go rent movies and only watch those movies when I was on the glider. And so I would I was just pairing this really unpleasant thing that didn't feel good to me, that I didn't want to do, with something really pleasant and enjoyable and distracting. And I did it every day. And I just got to the point where I would do it every single day. And I really looked forward to it. And then at some point, it did switch. And I can't tell you when that happened or like how long that takes. And I'm sure that's based on the individual largely and their learning history and all of these things. But at some point, I got to the point where it was like, I just like to work out. I just like to work out now. And it just feels good to me. And I feel so good afterwards, and all the endorphins that naturally occur. I can look forward to those things, and I know it's going to happen. There are still days I don't feel good, don't want to do it. And I do it anyway, because I know I'm going to feel good afterwards. But yeah, I think that initial, like, getting people going, you really have to pair it with something very, very enjoyable. And it can be anything. A lot of people use music as, it's kind of a natural thing that people do. They pair physical activity with music, or sometimes it's just the self-monitoring, like the watches and things like that, just seeing your steps and meeting goals. Like, they've done an amazing job with like Fitbit and Apple Watch of gamifying this behavior. So it's not necessarily that it's naturally rewarding, but yet maybe for some people, but this little badge that I can earn for doing this many of these exercises throughout the month, and they, at least Apple, tailors it to the person. It's really kind of incredible, their system. And these little beautiful little badges, they look fancy. And I don't know what it is. There's nothing else there but this little badge. And it's powerful. It can be very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about applying those principles, and then even kind of, like you said, gamifying something and making it so that it's almost like you have this challenge that's in front of you, but it feels like there's something added to it. It's not just me challenging myself. There's a point system. There's something going on. It does change behavior. It happened to me with the I think Peloton created this game on there where, like, all of a sudden it's like, go fast here. Yeah. Where
Yep.
I felt myself working harder, and I was like, why am I working harder today? And it's obvious that, there's something to it, and the score doesn't matter. But in my mind at that time, score mattered.
Right.
What are some of the other ways that technology is being immersed into behavioral change techniques that we should be aware of, whether it's for some of the drug rehab, or whether it's for being able to create healthy lifestyle choice?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot out there, but I will say one thing that maybe people aren't totally comprehending yet, but like, all of these devices, our phones and our watches, are incredibly powerful tools now in ways that we've just never known before. The number of sensors in a phone and what it can monitor, and now probably on the watches as well, is incredible. The Apple Watch here it's got heart rate, it's got it's constantly monitoring all of these things. It's got like walking stability and your sleep cycles and like how you're doing with sleep. There's just, and I think it's like, if you can imagine it, it's probably either being developed or it has already been developed. And if it hasn't, it could be developed. If you can think of a behavior that you'd want to change that can be somehow objectively measured through a sensor. There's like a gazillion of these sensors in our devices now that are just in our pocket every day or on our wrist with us at all times. Not everybody, obviously, not everybody's carrying these things around. Not everybody wants to be monitored in that way. And some people have concerns about privacy, which are fair as well. But they are pretty powerful tools for change. And I think gamification, as I mentioned before, is one of those things that can be done to incorporate this objective measurement with some kind of artificial incentive to get you, not, and this won't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of people, enough people that they've all developed their gamification tools.
Yeah. When you were talking about sleep patterns and things like that, is that, and personally, I've gone through this where it's like, I'll know I'm tired. I know I have sleep debt. I know that I need to go to bed earlier. I need to set my alarm at specific times. I don't make that change. Then all of a sudden I got one of those Whoop watches that started telling me what to do. And for some reason, I started following that almost to the T and saying, oh, wow, it tells me I have 45 minutes of sleep debt today. I must do something different today. I mean, it's crazy how that works.
Those little
Why?
notifications. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it probably, again, it's individual subject variability. Like individuals are responsive to different things. And so it sounds like you're a little more on the rule governed side, like you may not be able to set the rule, but if somebody else is setting the rule, you're going to want to try to follow it. And so perhaps that's part of it. And then other people are like really sensitive to social interactions or like what their peers are doing. And so seeing like a leaderboard can be really powerful for some people, or it can be really like hurtful for other people. We don't really know, like who's responding favorably and not favorably to these leaderboards where you're seeing your rank compared to other people and like wanting to be at the top. Some people just love to win and want to be the best. And then other people are like, I just want to not be at the bottom. I just don't want to be last. And that's all, like, as long as I'm in the middle somewhere, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And then people who are at the bottom are probably like, this doesn't work for me. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So yeah, I mean, it's individuals are going to respond to different things, which is part of the reason why like developing these tools should use lots of approaches. And if you're going to try to do this on your own and arrange a situation in your own like life, try to pay attention to what you respond to. Like, what is it that pushes you? I'm really like into programs. I'm kind of similar to you in a way where like if it's laid out for me until I'm told what I have to do, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to feel really bad if I don't do it. But if I had to just come up with it on my own, I would do nothing. But if I have a program and it's like, this is what you have to do each day, I just show up and I do it. But yeah.
That sounds like a very important concept. And I mean, whether it's with therapy, whether it's somebody who's looking at self-improvement, it's looking at that interpersonal component of what is the driver and understanding, like you said, am I a rule-governed individual? Am I somebody who needs the extra reinforcers where I need to be able to set up systems of reinforcement to be able to get me there? But then it feels like there's these behavioral technologies that match pretty well. Is that a recommendation? Because I mean, you have the opportunity right now to talk to a variety of different practitioners in the field who might not be applying the ecological principles with the behavioral principles, which it sounds like what you're saying right now is so needed. What would you be saying to them as far as, the value of being able to look and match some of these things and take data and really understand the effect?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think, I mean, on the one hand, you could take this like kind of blanket approach where you just try multi-component approach where you just make sure that all of those parts are present in your intervention packet. Like it's a package, and you've got the social component, but some people are really going to be turned off by the social stuff. So I don't know. I think it's just like being flexible and understanding all the different sensitivities, but that there are all these different tools out there. that could be applied. I'm just not, I think it's like going to be, this is what is so wonderful about behavior analysis, is that it really pays attention to the individual and doesn't just assume that like one size fits all and everything applies to everybody, because it doesn't. We all respond to things. I mean, there's enough categories, I think, of like certain people respond to the social stuff, certain people respond to the gamification elements, or the badges. But just are they're against themselves. They don't want to be against other people. They just want to be up against their own past behavior, So I think it's just, being aware of all the different strategies and then being flexible in tailoring it to where you see people responding favorably.
And that's a perfect intersection between what our podcast talks about a lot, which is being able to create that empowerment, that inclusion for autistics, so that they have a voice in guiding every decision that's being made for their own lives. And it sounds like the behavior modification techniques that you're describing are all about people understanding themselves, understanding how they work, and then being able to apply science to say, let's make these changes in a way that it's going to open up my life, make things better long term, versus constantly looking at the immediate gratification. So I love how all these worlds intersect. Where can people find more information, more resources, more knowledge on how to take behavioral modification and move it away from just the autism population, and instead looking at the broad scope of how can I take technology to change my individual habits? How can I look at being able to modify behavior in productive ways?
I don't know that there's like one resource. I think it's like looking into I don't know if the audience is really reading research and that kind of thing, but if you are, if they're practitioners who are reading research, then you might have to branch out beyond like behavior analysis journals, because like I rarely publish anything in a behavior analytics journal because it's broader than that, than necessarily what the audience is focused on. So identifying like who in the field is doing the work and then try to find their work out in some of these other places, searching the person, not the journal, I think. If you're looking for research. As far as other kinds of resources, I don't have a necessarily a good suggestion as to one place to go for that, like a repository. There's some people who have to produce content on places like Instagram or other social media, like YouTube and things like that, who are speaking to a broader audience, I think, about broader topics, I guess, is maybe like just the everyday behavioral kind of topics, and see if and there's actually also, if you're interested, like sport and fitness, specifically, there are special interest groups, or addiction or health. I guess sport, health and fitness, I think, there's a special interest group at ABAI for that. There's a special interest group for addiction. So yeah, maybe those would be good places. There's like Facebook pages for both of those special interest groups, I believe, as well. So go there.
And I think knowledge is power. I think that one of these things, as a recipient of care, it's sometimes you're just following the plan, not knowing the research behind it or the information that's guiding the decision-making process. And I would say is that I'd encourage almost everybody to, if you're doing a weight management plan, if you're doing a plan to be able to kind of reduce addictive behavior, or if you're doing something to be able to kind of slow down and make decision making a little bit more long-term, less impulsive, is that talk with whoever's guiding you on why, how, and what are the guiding principles, because I think it gets more buy-in usually.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely advocate for people learning those basic principles of like why these treatments are being applied, what is the foundation here behind it, because that always leads to options, I think, in terms of how it's being executed. It doesn't have to be like this one way. Like one little bit of advice for that, and because you've come back to this a couple of times, and I wanted to say this like a strategy for people who have the tendency to maybe spend the $5 at Starbucks or whatever, instead of save up for that car or that trip, is like there are tools you can use to help you when you just can't do it yourself. Like when you're just, you can't trust yourself with this situation. So there are like apps that will take the money and just, or you can have your auto transfer. You're just like, whenever your paycheck comes in, have a percentage of that money transferred into a savings account that you can't really touch, that you don't really look at. Like I did this with my retirement. It's like I just have, I had a really good suggestion from like my insurance broker or whatever. Was just every time you get a raise, add 3% to what you're contributing, and you won't even notice it. It will feel like you won't even notice that money was taken out of your check because you got a little bit of a raise, but yet you're going to be putting more money in to your retirement. And so that's just like a painless way to have to encourage self-control when your tendency would be to spend the money or be impulsive.
So, and it does. I mean, with any of these things, it takes a community, and I think that's what we kind of not preach, but that's one of the things that we're constantly talking about is the fact that you can't make all these decisions on your own. Sometimes it helps to have somebody to be alongside you, help support, help guide. And that's another great example of that. But Dr. Raiff, I appreciate you coming on and talking today, because oftentimes is that we're thinking about behavior analytic work and applying it just to a specific population. And I love the conversations where we're broadening the use of our own science to realize that A, we're using it all the time, and B, it has some very valid application in a lot of behaviors that affect our day-to-day living and our health. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.